About the author. Robert Pantano is the creator of the YouTube channel and production house known as Pursuit of Wonder, which covers similar topics of philosophy, science, and literature through short stories, guided experiences, video essays, and more. youtube.com/pursuitofwonder. pursuitofwonder.com. Preface. My interest in philosophy started where I'd imagine it starts for most people, a dissatisfaction with what I had been told about life combined with a curiosity about what I had not. I remember the feeling when I first read a collection of essays by Ralph Waldo Emerson. I remember thinking, yes, this is it. This is what I've been looking for. Then the same happened with Dostoevsky, with Camus, with Schopenhauer, with Pessoa, with Wallace, and so on. Throughout my life, philosophy and literature have given me a way to confront my concerns, thoughts, questions, and doubts, without the tiptoeing and masquerading I often experienced in other areas of life and self-development. Continually, I found the earnestness of writers and thinkers providing me with a feeling of mutual respect and understanding because, for the first time, I felt I was being offered attempts at truth that were closer to my experience of life. They were bold, direct, and unwavering. Throughout the years, I've realized how common it is to feel like something is missing and that there must be more behind everything. So many of us feel as though we have been given a carcass of life, of meaning, that is covered by a blanket of falsity and ignorance. There is a need for a type of food that nourishes the mind and spirit, a food that people from all around the world and at all times in history have contributed small but notable servings of in the form of philosophy and art. As I've studied and learned more about these subjects, I've felt an increasing obligation to help provide for others what was provided to me, access to these crucial servings of intellectual sustenance. I've felt the need to translate, share, and contribute to the conversations I have had with books, films, videos, and art, as I understand them. This book is a collection of essays that have been written as part of this effort. The essays originally appeared in video form on my YouTube channel, Pursuit of Wonder. But the YouTube channel was originally formed out of a book that got rejected by publishers and agents. Since I couldn't find a traditional distribution channel, I took the manuscript of the book and turned each section into videos. Those videos were the beginning of the Pursuit of Wonder YouTube channel, a project that has developed and evolved into something that is beyond my ability to comprehend. In full circle, I have now begun and hope to continue sharing my work in print as well as other media. Pursuit of Wonder started as a longing to relentlessly pursue my curiosity toward wonder and truth. It then turned into a sense of obligation to write and create the most interesting and useful content I could, based on what I found. And now, it has turned into a source of great meaning for me. Through the process, I have formed a new relationship with the world in one of its greatest lights, a community of those interested in truth, in living well, and in pursuing wonder. I hope you find something in this work, and in my work more broadly, that might assist in your own process of discovering meaning just the same. Part 1: The Essence of Wonder. The first selection of essays begins where philosophy both began in time and begins for the individual, at the intersection of wonder and meaninglessness, the point at which our curiosity meets its match in a futile, indifferent, chaotic, and absurd universe. At the moment of self-consciousness and inquiry into the world, we are fated to ask questions like, how does the world work? Why does it work this way? What does it mean to be me? How do I deal with these questions and their seemingly unanswerable nature? It is these questions that we find at the bottom of philosophy and at the top of the descent into meaninglessness, a descent that we must arguably make, because if we have already explored any of these questions or intuitions, we have already begun down this path, and it is too late to turn around and unknow what we now know. And so, the key is not to stop but to continue down and onward in order to find a new ground of existence in which we can bear and live comfortably with truth, or the lack thereof. The following essays touch on this process and how various ancient philosophies from both the East and West can be used and applied today toward living a worthwhile and meaningful life, despite life's uncertain conditions. The wonder of the unknown. In our everyday life, most things are generally considered normal and routine: a tree, a bird, a drive home from work, a meal, a load of laundry, a night's sleep, and so on. At a certain age of adolescence, most things begin to fall into the category of being rather unexciting or tedious. This can, for obvious reasons, pose problems for our experience of life. It can produce a frequent sense of boredom and monotony. Science, religions, and philosophies often work to provide us with answers and clarity about the universe and our existence within it. We seek to learn about what we, as a collective species, know about ourselves and this reality in order to improve our experience of it. This can be helpful, of course, but perhaps an equally valuable and often neglected source of wisdom, joy, and vitality can be found not in what we know but in what we don't know. 19th-century writer Henry David Thoreau wrote, "My desire for knowledge is intermittent, but my desire to commune with the spirit of the universe, to be intoxicated with the fumes, call it, of that divine nectar, to bear my head through atmospheres and over heights unknown to my feet, is perennial and constant." In other words, the experience and effects of concrete knowledge can be fleeting, but the wonder found in the spirit of the unknown can be constant and enduring. With no more than a glance upward at a clear, starry night sky, as we stare into the eyes of the incomprehensible and infinite space above us, we are likely to experience an overwhelming awareness of how little we know and how little we are. The universe stares back at us with its stark glare and reminds us how deeply strange and unclear our life really is, even the most simple and normal things. The great cosmologist Carl Sagan said, "The cosmos is all that is or was or ever will be." Our feeblest contemplations of the cosmos stir us. There is a tingling in the spine, a catch in the voice, a faint sensation, as if a distant memory, of falling from a height. This feeling of awe is immensely liberating and provoking. It reminds us that we stand at the crossroads of the infinite and the finite, everything and nothing, knowledge and unawareness. In truth, no matter what we think we know, we are probably wrong, and no matter what anyone else thinks they know, they are probably wrong. No one knows what's going on in any fundamental sense. Nothing about this life is simple or clear, and from the perspective of the stars, nothing down here on earth, including us, matters all that much to anything beyond itself. Paradoxically, in this, we find great opportunity for wisdom, humility, exploration, and profound experience in our lives. Nobody ever figures out what life is all about, and it doesn't matter. Explore the world. Nearly everything is really interesting if you go into it deeply enough, said renowned theoretical physicist Richard Feynman. In even the most common and mundane things, there is complexity and strangeness. We don't even know why we sleep or dream. We don't know how most of our brain works or what consciousness is. We don't know if time is real in any physical sense. We don't know what gravity is or why it is. We don't know if there are infinite other universes or dimensions around us. We don't know why energy or matter even came to be in the first place, or why it was followed by a perfect sequence of colliding, combining, exploding, and emerging, all to put us here, right now, able to ask why. At the base of almost everything, the resulting truth is this: we don't know. When we disregard this unknowingness, we can easily become disinterested, uninspired, and worn out of this life. We can put great stress on things that perhaps don't matter all that much and neglect experiences and things that do. We can feel the pressure and anxiety of chasing perfection and certainty, which do not exist. We should look to the universe often, not solely for answers but for perspective, for a helpful adjustment and an aerial consideration of our daily life. With this practice, the little things in life become more striking, the mistakes and the annoyances become less significant, the calm comes more easily, and the everyday activities of our lives that we so often view as wasteful and tedious reveal themselves to be wonderfully strange and curious parts of our existence that we should make effort to ponder and appreciate as often as we can. As if to say, I'd love to marvel at and enjoy this work of art I've created. The universe gave itself humanity. Through our eyes, the universe is perceiving itself. Through our ears, the universe is listening to its harmonies. We are the witnesses through which the universe becomes conscious of its glory, of its magnificence. said 20th-century American-British philosopher Alan Watts. What a shame it would be to waste this experience by failing to appreciate the glory and magnificence found in the unknown. We must try to remember as often as we can that the unknown permeates everything. Its wonder is always above us, below us, around us, and inside us, whenever we need it. Why intelligent people become pessimistic. Starting from the instant we form an awareness of the world, all the way up until the final second before we die, we will without doubt experience many moments in which life goes very wrong, moments where a friend betrays us, where we make a big mistake or fail at something we worked really hard at, where someone we love decides they no longer feel the same for us or we no longer feel the same for them, moments where we lose someone close far too early, and so on. From small to big, annoying to tragic, there will continue to be moments where ourself, the world, and humanity appear to all be in complete conflict and disarray. At a very young age, life seems to be mostly candy, playgrounds, cartoon mice, and fun. The universe feels like it is made for us. Throughout childhood, things in popular culture like movies, TV shows, and advertising reinforce this hopeful optimism by selling us ideals of a life filled with easy friendships, love at first sight, exciting lifestyles, successful and fulfilling careers, and cool products that will all culminate in a perfect, smooth life. Of course, as we grow further past our youthful innocence, the world increasingly reveals itself to be far more complicated and convoluted. As we experience more of life, and we are continually disappointed by our optimism's inability to align with the real conditions of the world, our optimism is beaten further and further into submission. At this point, the individual is often compelled to surrender any form of naive optimism and replace it with some degree of pessimism. Arguably, any honestly examined life goes through this transition. At first, this might sound rather somber and bleak, and if we stop here, it very well can be. However, with the proper consideration, perhaps there is a way in which we can leverage this pessimism and use it to our advantage. Perhaps there is a way through pessimism that leads to an adapted and more reasonable optimism, not the sort of delusional optimism that is ignorant to the somber truths of our condition, but rather, an optimism that exists in spite of it all. Arguably, all great philosophies and religions incorporate some degree of pessimism in their foundations. What reason would philosophies and religions have to exist if they did not first admit the existence of the pains, confusions, and uncertainties of life? The philosophy of Stoicism suggests that the universe is indifferent to what we want from it. Buddhism says that life is suffering. Existentialism and Absurdism say that we are stricken by our need for meaning in a life that is inherently meaningless. Christianity proclaims that the condition of humankind is inflicted with temptation and imperfection. Along with many others, these schools of thought realize that life contains fundamental pessimisms. However, what is powerful, important, and lasting about any good philosophy or frame of thinking is what it attempts to do with these pessimisms. A helpful philosophy first realizes and admits the sad, troublesome, and often tragic conditions of our life, and then attempts to grapple with and overcome them so that we might live in spite of those conditions. A healthy dose of pessimism is necessary in our ability to adequately deal with this life. It helps us mitigate our expectations and serves as padding that protects us from life's constant attempts to beat our spirit out of us. Pessimism counterbalances the ridiculously overly optimistic expectations of the culture we live in and helps us adapt out of the deeply detached, unrealistic perspective that we likely formed as children. It reminds us that things won't always go our way or always be that nice, but rather, things will go wrong a lot, but despite this, we can still be okay. Paradoxically, we must recognize that through a certain quality of pessimism, we can better arrive at a more reasonably optimistic experience of life. We are all struggling and improvising our way through this strange existence, constantly confused and unsure. No one is perfect or normal in any traditional sense. No one knows who or why they are. We all make mistakes, big and small. Happiness is hard and unclear. There appears to be no achievement, material item, or endgame that can solve all the problems we face as individuals or as a species. There is greed, tragedy, and malevolence in this world that we have and will continue to experience. And at any moment, our lives could end, this whole world and humanity could end, and at some moment, they will certainly end. But despite everything that was just said, the thought of it all ending should and does make us sad and tremble with fear. We don't want it to end. Despite the chaos, uncertainties, and hardships, we want to go on, we want to endure, we want to see what we can do, overcome, and experience in the face of it all. In this, we find the hopeful spirit and strength of humankind. We find the optimism in the pessimism. This game of reality appears to have rules, some that we can understand and tamper with, most of which we cannot, some that work in our favor, plenty that do not. Where these rules come from and why they are the way they are is completely and utterly unclear. What is clear, however, is that at this moment, they are, and because they are, we are. To be completely optimistic about the rules always working in our favor would be foolish. However, to be completely pessimistic about the game as a whole simply because the rules don't always work in our favor would be equally foolish. Would a game where the rules always work in the player's favor even be a game at all? Of what interest would this be? What experience would there be to have? To give up on life entirely would be like refusing to play a game because we lose sometimes, as if the game would even be worth playing if we knew we were going to win every time we played. There is courage in facing the realities of pessimism and there is strength to be formed in its name. We must be pessimistic about life's conditions in order to face their realities, but we must also be optimistic about our ability to face their realities and form strength, meaning, and experience through them. Pessimism is real. It is natural. It is helpful. But it is not all there is. Like dirt is to flowers, like darkness is to light, and like silence is to song, pessimism is to optimism. Rather than being optimistic about the possibility of finding things and ideas that will rid us and our lives of disorder, defectiveness, confusion, and vulnerability, perhaps we should attempt to be optimistic about the potential value that we can find in accepting and enduring these things. We should be optimistic about our ability to turn the ups and downs into an interesting and beautiful ride. In the dirt of life, it is up to us to plant the seeds, watch the flowers grow, and enjoy their beauty, even in spite of the fact that we know that they will die. Wisdom begins with knowing you know nothing. The philosophy of Socrates and Plato. Known as the father of Western philosophy, the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates is regarded as one of the most influential thinkers in history. Encouraging and shaping the early budding of philosophy and directly inspiring other formative ancient Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, Socrates would be a catalyst for the way humanity has thought and continues to think about the world and the way we live within it. There are no known written works directly attributed to Socrates, so he remains a fairly mysterious figure. All accounts of his life and philosophy are provided by other classical writers, many of which differ and sometimes contradict each other. In historical studies, this is what is known as the Socratic problem, the fact that it is difficult, if not impossible, to fully pin down an accurate picture of what he believed. However, most of what is understood and believed to be accurate is found in the work of his most famous student, Plato, who would go on to become an essential figure in Socrates' legacy as well as for the development of Western philosophy in general, writing around 36 books, all comprised of dialogues primarily featuring Socrates. It is generally agreed that Socrates was born in Athens in ancient Greece in around 469 BC. It is believed that his philosophical occupation began after a successful career as a stonemason and having fought with distinction in the Athenian military during the Peloponnesian War. During this later, philosophically focused part of his life, Socrates spent most of his time wandering around Athens, asking lots of questions, and challenging lots of men who the public believed to be wise. He would soon become very skeptical of the so-called wisdom of the time, finding that most men who claimed wisdom and were held to be wise were essentially just arrogant. In Plato's book, Apology, Socrates has this to say about his interaction with one particular wise man. Conversing with him, this man seemed to be wise to many other people and especially to himself, but not to be so, and then I tried to show him that he thought he was wise, but was not. As a result, I became hateful to him and to many of those present, and so, as I went away, I thought to myself, I am wiser than this man, for neither of us really knows anything fine and good, but this man thinks he knows something when he does not, whereas I, as I do not know anything, do not think I do either. I seem, then, in just this little thing to be wiser than this man at any rate, that what I do not know I do not think I know either. It was this that Socrates believed separated him from others of the time and defined true wisdom. Arguably, he was right, as this credo would ultimately become one of the defining components of a legacy that has lasted for millennia while the philosophies of other wise men of the time have faded into obscurity. Socrates would go on to spend much of his time attempting to teach and convince others to question what they held to be true, and realize, as he put it, that, he only true wisdom is knowing you know nothing. In doing so, he believed he would compel others to join him on a journey of philosophical inquiry toward a better life as they realized their current answers and beliefs were insufficient. As time passed, Socrates would garner a following of young students interested in his way of thinking. Although he was skeptical of knowledge and popular ideas, he was not without convictions. He taught and made claims about politics. Being extremely critical of democracy, he made assessments of values, prioritizing virtue, self-knowledge, goodness, truth, and happiness over wealth, fame, and power. He developed explanations of ethics, believing that evil is always done out of ignorance and harms the doer more than the victim. He defined concepts of the soul, and the list goes on. What is most notable, however, is that, in contrast to the more cosmic focus of the presocratic thinkers, Socrates maintained that the purpose of philosophy was to answer the very practical, down-to-earth question, what is the way we ought to live? Despite his good intentions, Socrates' efforts were often poorly received by the public. After pushing his luck too far, he was put on trial for religious impiety and corrupting the youth. He was found guilty and sentenced to death. In 399 BC, he would be given a cup of poison hemlock to drink, which would slowly move through his body until reaching his heart and taking from Socrates his last breath. One of history's greatest minds shut down for asking too many questions about a world that was not yet ready to admit it was still at the starting line. Although his mission would be cut short, it would be far from unsuccessful. One of Socrates' greatest legacies was his student Plato, who would successfully take the handoff from him and officially begin the relay race of Western philosophy. Plato would follow in Socrates' footsteps of skepticism, critical questioning, reasoning, and the prioritization of knowledge toward achieving what was termed arete, or virtue. Unlike Socrates, however, Plato wrote down his work and crafted a more defined philosophical system, producing 36 books during his lifetime and setting up the first ever university, which was called the Academy. It is for this reason that Plato is considered by many to be the first ever true philosopher, at least in the Western tradition. In his work, Plato would explore love, friendship, beauty, politics, ethics, and happiness. However, arguably one of his most prominent and influential philosophical contributions was his thinking about thinking itself. Following Socrates' tradition of skepticism, Plato's next move was to question how we can and do come to know things at all. Ultimately, Plato believed that knowledge is possible and that there are fixed, objective truths to be discovered and used, or more accurately, rediscovered, because Plato believed all knowledge was innate prior to birth and then forgotten upon birth, requiring recollection through reasoning. In what would become known as Platonic idealism, Plato would separate the realm of truth from the material world, distinguishing the world of things as we perceive them from the world of things as they really are. For Plato, reality as we observe it is a flawed reflection of a higher truth that exists in a realm beyond time, space, and the human mind, containing universalities and abstract objects that exist in their most pure, unchanging ideal form. Plato would refer to these as the forms and suggested that they function as the fundamental building blocks of the material world. As a simplified example, consider how there are many trees in the world but that no two trees are identical. Despite the fact that each tree is different from the rest, all of them, despite their differences, are still trees. According to Plato, this is because all trees are imperfect shadows of the perfect, ideal form of a tree, that all trees have as their model. It is through our knowledge of this perfect and ideal form of a tree that we recognize a tree as a tree, that we discern the treeness in every tree. From a practical standpoint, Plato suggested that through reason and philosophy, individuals and societies could understand ideals such as justice, happiness, friendship, being, and goodness, in order to strive toward and attain them. Plato would illustrate this theory with his most popular metaphor, the allegory of the cave, which is contained in Book 7 of his work, The Republic. In this allegory, he tells the story of a group of prisoners who have been chained up facing a wall inside a cave. They have been there ever since birth and have no knowledge of the outside world. On the wall that they are facing, shadows of different shapes are cast by people passing in front of a fire behind them with various objects. The prisoners name and classify the shadows, believing that they are seeing the true forms of things. However, when suddenly one of the prisoners is freed, he exits the cave and discovers the real world outside, all the actual forms and qualities of the objects that were previously just displayed as shadows to him. This prisoner, after realizing what he has become aware of, returns to the cave to tell the other prisoners. However, when he does, they think he has gone insane or been brainwashed or corrupted by whatever is outside. They respond not only with resistance but also violence, hostile to his attempt to challenge their beliefs and encourage a new, improved knowledge of the world. There are, of course, multiple ways of interpreting this allegory, but in the context of his theory of forms, Plato creates the distinction between the shadows and the objects they are cast by to parallel the forms and the material world we experience, how we are all caved inside our own senses, restricted from and ignorant of the true forms of things. The escaped prisoner, of course, represents the philosopher who, through reason, righteously tries to communicate his discoveries but is resisted or even killed by the public. As interesting, innovative, and useful as this allegory is, there is at least one obvious issue with it, which is perhaps mirrored in the problem of Plato's philosophy and almost all of Western philosophy as a whole. How does the prisoner who was freed know that once outside, he is not merely in another sort of cave? How does he know that the objects in their supposed truer, pure form outside the cave are not merely another sort of crude shadow cast by another purer source he is not yet aware of or perhaps can never be aware of? And if he were to somehow reach or discover a subsequent truer realm, how would he know this one to be true? Does not the increasingly common discovery of, obviously, true things to be untrue increase the odds that what is currently being discovered is also untrue? Of course, although Socrates and Plato were fundamental to the founding of Western philosophy, both combining to influence essential ideas and questions about reality, knowledge, reason, and the way an individual and society ought to exist, much of what they believed and claimed does not hold up today. Although perhaps they were the escaped prisoners of their time, they were nonetheless still prisoners in another cave just outside of the first one. Perhaps all reality is a prison and time is its guard. In Plato's Apology, Socrates says to the citizens of Athens following his trial, "I prophesy to you that after my death the punishment will soon descend upon you, a punishment far more severe than that which you have inflicted on me. You will have caused my death, hoping in vain to escape from my critical questioning." Around 2,400 years later, it would seem that Socrates' prophecy, in at least some sense, has come true. We have yet to escape from his critical questioning. With each new generation, each new philosophy, and each new realm of knowledge, we find ourselves in the wake of Socrates, still either unsure or in denial. Socrates and Plato gave us some of the first tools needed to begin taking the whole world apart, but they never had, and we likely never will have, an instruction manual to put it back together. We still know very little of what it means to be a self, let alone a true self, what it means to live or how we ought to, what consciousness is, why there is life or a universe at all, what the ultimate purpose of literally anything and everything is, if there is any truth and how we can know for sure, and the list goes on. One of the only true constants that appears to have remained from the early groundwork of ancient Greek philosophy is perhaps the recognition of our ignorance, the Socratic paradox, "I know that I know nothing." Socrates knew he knew nothing but seemed to believe that this paradox could be overcome to good end. Perhaps it can, certainly in many practical cases, it seems to be.